This program contains dramatic discussions of real-world events and contains material which is intended for adults only. Listener discretion is advised.
This week on the Proprietaries.
Well, how you think the crack rock gets into the country? We don't own any planes. We don't own no ships. But we are not the people who are flying and floating that shit in here.
CIA owns this?
No. Independent aviation consultants.
IAC.
Yeah.
The Proprietaries, an unauthorized descent into the astrological charts of proprietary companies, black-budget corporations that conduct business in the shadows, above the law and off all maps, secret banks and stealth airlines, classified programs and covert bases, all outposts of an empire within an empire, a vastly well-financed ghost realm that officially does not exist.
Okay, welcome to episode 2 of the Proprietaries, where we discuss astrology by looking at the charts of CIA proprietaries, partners, and contractors. We look at those partners, contractors, and proprietaries by looking at astrology. So, before we get started, a couple things, some of my goals with this podcast. One of the things is I learned astrology, or basically looked up the charts of anything that I was interested in. That's how I taught myself astrology. So that ranged from Star Trek episodes to charts of spy satellites. Okay. And I also wrote about oil for 10 years. Actually, I had one of arguably the most popular oil-related site on the internet. Anytime you Googled oil, it came up actually at the top in the organic search, not paid search, but organic. And so in running that site for almost a decade, I ended up learning a lot about the intelligence agencies, because one of the areas of interest, as you might imagine, is the world of oil. And so the world of oil and the procurement of other resources and things like proprietary companies often go hand in hand, as do things like banking and housing and, of course, the environment and so on and so forth. So, with this episode, we're going to look at 2 movies. Movies have charts too, just like organizations or people. And the first is the chart for the Boys in the Hood film, which you saw a clip from. And the second is a chart from the Tom Cruise movie American Made, which is a more or less based in reality film about Barry Seal, who was a infamous cocaine trafficker back in the 80s. So first we're going to do Boys in the Hood, and then we're going to take a musical break, and then we're going to do American Made. But before we start, what I will say, the 2 films, they actually do cover, they're not very, very different films, but they're kind of interrelated. You can see how I put those 2 clips together. The one where the Lawrence Fishburne character, Ferry Styles, is like, well, we're not the ones flying and floating that stuff in here. It's like, well, who is? Who's got the airplanes and the boats and whatnot? And then it cuts to, the Barry Seal character with getting his airplanes from his CIA handler. Now, in reality, allegedly, he purchased those planes from Air America. It was either from Air America or from one of Air America's various subsidiaries. So Air America is the most infamous CIA proprietary, famous or infamous, depending on whose opinion you seek out, the most famous CIA proprietary ever. In fact, that's kind of the name that usually comes to mind when you hear CIA proprietaries, Air America. In fact, they were so famous and or infamous that there's even a Mel Gibson, Robert Downey Jr. movie made about the company. But in that scene, you see him getting an airplane. He didn't get it. It wasn't like somebody at the CIA gave him an airplane, which is how it's depicted there. It's alleged he actually purchased them from Air America, and or at least purchased some planes from Air America. And then the hangar that he kept them at was a place called, what was it, Rich Mountain Aviation. I looked up their chart too. Air America was an Aquarius Taurus moon, and the company that he had his airplanes stored at, the hangar, was I think it was a Sag with a it was a Libra with a Sag moon, but a lot of Libra planets. So I do have a big article and subsequent podcasts planned on Air America's chart, and then I may do Rich Mountain Aviation also at some point. So with that said, what I'm going to do with the Boys in the Hood film is we're just going to do the Sun-Moon combination first. I've got some other examples in there. This did appear in the second issue of Hexagon. Then when I get done with the that Sun-Moon combination, Taurus Sun, Taurus Moon, we'll take a musical break. I'll come back and then do the rest of the chart. Okay. All right, so I call this Taurus Sun, Taurus Moon, the CIA and the OGD. That stands for the Cash Investment Agency and the Original Girl Detective. And it'll become obvious in a minute or two why I chose those names. All right. Taurus is a sign of resource accumulation, symbolized by the bovine, symbol of wealth dating back tens of thousands of years. In the old days, Taurans were often found in hands-on professions that made use of the earth itself. The baker, the butcher, and the candlestick maker were likely all Taurans. In the modern day, Taurus is a sign of the asset appraiser, the real estate tycoon, the luxury car dealer, the investment broker, the mutual fund administrator, the wine collector, and the cigar aficionado. To illustrate, rapper Busta Rhymes is a Taurus who famously penned the song Pass the Crevassier, an impassioned ode to the top-shelf cognac that is this sign's drink of choice, according to Rob Marriott and Sonia Mayjet. Not all Taurans are necessarily wealthy like Mr. Rhymes, but most will have a tangible appreciation for the finer things in life. Even baller on a budget Taurans are likely to experience dinner at the Four Seasons or a trip to the Bentley dealership as something akin to a religious pilgrimage. Taurans of the vegan or yogini persuasions may eschew overtly opulent creature comforts for ones that are sustainably correct but still quite luxurious. The more bohemian versions of this sign will pass on the Crevassier in favor of designer kombucha, while trading in reservations at the Four Seasons for organic meals from the Whole Foods Corporation. Actress turned New Age icon Shirley MacLaine is a good example of this type of Taurus. I don't know if she owns any luxury cars, but she does claim to have encountered UFOs. High-end intergalactic forms of transport that are to the age of Aquarius what Bentley Continentals are to the age of the automobile. When a person, organization, or agency has both their sun, it's a conscious identity, and moon, as their emotional needs, in this sign, they will be doubly oriented to all things Taurus: high-priced art and high-end clothing, fine wine and gourmet food, luxury cars and lavish jewelry, bank vaults and gold bullion, dead presidents and dollar bills. Astrologer Jefferson Anderson says this pairing, quote, has an instinctive feel for money and management and does well in business banking and economics, end quote. According to astrologer Jason Fleming's article, Zodiac Mixtapes, theme songs for this pairing include Drop a Gem on Them by Mobb Deep and Paid in Full by Eric B. and Rakim. Singer Kelly Clarkson is a Taurus who's dropped so many musical gems that she is now one of the most fully paid entertainers of her generation. However, should this pairing turn to its dark side, it goes from being good with money and a natural management to being possessed by greed and obsessed with getting paid. 1991 rap song B Better Have My Money, I'm abbreviating there, the rapper AMG captures the shadow of the Taurus-Taurus combination in lucid if ribald fashion. In addition to being oriented to resource accumulation, Taurus-Taurus pairing will often find his or her way into covert operations and clandestine arrangements. which are generally considered the domain of Scorpio, the sign opposite to Taurus. This is because, according to Berkeley-based astrologer Linda Rose, when a chart has both the sun and moon in the same sign, the entity will often express as the opposite sign. I suspect this kickover phenomenon observed by Ms. Rose is some type of psychological compensation mechanism similar to what happens in Chinese medicine when one meridian is so overloaded with energy that the person hyper expresses the characteristics of the opposite meridian. So I'm going to add a little something here. So if somebody's coughing a lot, they may have a lung issue, but in Chinese medicine, the lung is paired with the large intestine. It's possible they actually have a large intestine issue and it's kicking over a lung. That's not a medical diagnosis. I'm not a TCM practitioner. That's just my layman's understanding of how that can work. So if you have an overload of one, it's like a dam that's overflowing, and it flows into another dam. If the dam is, say, linked to another reservoir or something, it flows over to that. That's my guess for how it works. You see similar things in the physical body, where if person might get it, like one muscle might be making a lot of noise, like it's injured or it's very active, and it's connected to excess concentration somewhere else in the body. Anyways, regardless of the exact mechanism behind the phenomenon, it does seem to track reality with a high degree of consistency. To illustrate, Wall Street financier Bernie Madoff is a Taurus Sun, Taurus Moon, whose obsession with bees having his money, it's Taurus, led him deep into a series of shadowy underworlds, Scorpio. Just how shadowy, scorpionic, were the circles Madoff was running in? According to investigative reporter Wayne Madsen, Madoff's operation may have had some type of link to the Central Intelligence Agency, one of the most scorpionic and secretive outfits on the planet. A number of informed commentators in the business world have suspected Madoff was investing cash, money, on behalf of drug cartels, organizations which traffic in the scorpionic trades of addictions and assassinations. Madoff wasn't the baker, the butcher, or the candlestick maker, but he was a banker, a broker, and may have been laundering money for the crack cocaine makers. Obviously, not all double Taurans will express their capacity for deep cover operations, that's Scorpio, in such a predatorial fashion. Here's where we get into Boys in the Hood. For instance, using its premiere date at the 1991 Cannes Film Festival as its date of birth, film Boys in the Hood is also a Taurus Sun, Taurus Moon, albeit one whose central character is to Bernie Madoff what Han Solo was to Darth Vader. It's one of the few films that hints at a connection between finance, Taurus, and covert operations, Scorpio, which it does when Lawrence Fishburne's character Furious Styles, who's a financial broker, explained who is and is not involved in the high-level bank-rolling Taurus of the crack cocaine trade. That's Scorpio. And of course, you saw a brief clip of that. When they go out to the billboard, and he explains, he says, cash for your home. And he goes on to explain, what that's really about, gentrification. And you could actually look into, who is financing, like there are certain banks and organizations who were involved in all that, and you can actually go look up their incorporation papers, look up their charts if you're so inclined. So astrologers Susan Charles Harvey say the Taurus-Taurus pairing excels at offering, quote, straight from the shoulder observations and calling a spade, end quote. This is exactly what Fishburne's character does in the billboard scene when he observes of the crack epidemic. How do you think the crack rock gets in the country? We don't own any planes. We don't own no ships. We're not the people who are flying and floating that stuff in here. Well, Bernie Madoff was a financial advisor, a Wall Street financial advisor, is Taurus, but allegedly, perhaps, possibly in league with drug cartels or intelligence agencies, that's Scorpio. Furious Styles' character was a financial advisor who understood the drug cartels were making money for Wall Street banks, that's Taurus, and or intelligence agencies, Scorpio. So both Bernie Madoff and Furious Styles are double Taurans expressing as Scorpios, although obviously only one of them would you want moving into your neighborhood. All right, so I got a couple more examples of Taurus Sun, Taurus Moon. Taurus Sun, Taurus Moon. B better have my suspicious activity reports. And Since this might play on terrestrial radio, I've got to, not use the actual words, but you know the phrase I'm referring to there. Bernie Madoff and Furious Styles, the Furious Styles character, portrayed by Fishburne in Boys in the Hood film, are far from the only double Taurans whose lives have occupied the nexus between cash money, that's Taurus, and careers in which suspicion, Scorpio, is the currency of the realm. For instance, using its establishment date as its date of birth, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network is a Taurus Sun, Taurus Moon. So it's FinCEN for short. If you haven't heard of FinCEN before, it's a bureau inside the United States Department of the Treasury that, quote, collects and analyzes information about financial transactions in order to combat money laundering, terrorist financiers, and other financial crimes, according to its Wikipedia entry. Much of what FinCEN does revolves around the collection and analysis of what are called suspicious activity reports, which banks are required to file anytime a customer makes a financial transaction that's Taurus that appears suspicious, Scorpio. According to a paranoia-inducing 1993 Wired magazine article entitled Big Brother Wants to Look at Your Bank Account, FinCEN's capacity to track the flow of money, as Taurus, is of tremendous interest to spy agencies like the CIA, Scorpio. This is from the Wired article. Risk of the CIA getting its hands on this is serious. We know the kind of unscrupulous people who populate the spook world, said a Washington area private investigator who conducts many legitimate financial investigations for a CIA-linked firm. This kind of financial data, when coupled with other information like a person's credit history, could be used for blackmail, bribery, and extortion, said the investigator, who has a military intelligence background. DTS, which was one of the systems they were trying out, could present an inviting mechanism for quieting unwanted dissent or for defanging an unruly congressional leader bent on exposing some questionable CIA operation. Although still in its embryonic stage, and in spite of looming privacy obstacle it will inevitably confront, FinCEN is seen by many in the government as a catalyst for a powerful, all-seeing, all-knowing global financial tracking organization. This is from almost 25 years ago. So you can imagine it's only gotten more advanced since then. As far as quieting unwanted dissent and defanging unruly political leaders goes, Taurus loves money and Scorpio loves sex, so maybe it's fitting that the transactions recorded by FinCEN were what revealed New York State Governor Eliot Spitzer had been availing himself to the services of the $4,000 an hour Emperor's Club VIP call girl operation. It's probably just a coincidence that shortly before Spitzer's call girl payments were made public, he had announced to go on the warpath against Wall Street's biggest banks and their partners in crime inside the Bush administration. So yeah, it's kind of strange how that worked out there. Fortunately, outside of Wired's 1993 article, there's been very little written about FinCEN since it was established over 20 years ago. The agency does, however, get a brief mention in the 1998 spy film Enemy of the State, where a federal agent orders a, quote, a FinCEN workup on the Will Smith character. And you can go see that on YouTube. It's really quick. You almost have to be looking for it to hear him say it. All right. So Taurus is great at keeping things short and simple. Here's a short, if oversimplified, way to understand FinCEN. It is to your bank accounts and business filings with the National Security Agency. It's to your email accounts and telephone calls. Okay. So, final example. Taurus Sun, Taurus Moon, the original girl detective, or OGD. Using character's debut date as her date of birth, Nancy Drew of the famous mystery novels is also a double Taurus. This is the Nancy Drew series. We don't know the character's birthday, but the book itself, the franchise, is a double Taurus. Nancy Drew character was entirely fictional, while the Furious Styles character that we meet in Boys in the Hood was basically real. I mean, he was a fictional character, but he was, could have easily been real. Yet, as double Taurans expressing as Scorpios, the two characters do have something in common. Both are naturals at getting to the bottom of who or what is bankrolling, Taurus, the criminal conspiracies, Scorpio, being carried out in their local neighborhoods. Taurus people generally do well financially. Both the Boys in the Hood film and the Nancy Drew series have been enormously successful at the box office and bookstores, respectively. Like FinCEN, which was worth a lot of money, Taurus, but has made her stock and trade the compilation of suspicious activity reports. That's Scorpio. Okay, so another thing with the Boys in the Hood chart is that double Taurus, right opposite is Pluto and Scorpio. So Pluto is depth and intensity and purging, but it can also be like almost like terror. You know, it can be the purging process can be pretty scary, right? So that's opposite that. And if you just see a double Taurus, it can be very rich, you know, like think of like rich food, or stability, you know, like the Furry Styles character, but it's opposite that Pluto and Scorpio. So it's almost like it's at the front line of the Plutonic, whatever Plutonic event society was going through at that time, which 84 to 95, when Pluto was in Scorpio, that's considered the astrological signature of the AIDS epidemic, of the collapse of the Soviet Union, and also the crack epidemic. Those were the big Pluto and Scorpio phenomenons during that time. Okay, we're going to take a musical break, and I'll come back and we'll take a quick look at the rest of the chart for Boys in the Hood. Then we'll do another musical break, and then we'll do American Made. All right. Okay, so we're back, and like I was saying, we were doing Boys in the Hood, Taurus Sun, Taurus Moon, Cash Investment Agency, and the original Girl Detective. So yeah, Taurus Sun, Taurus Moon, opposed by Pluto and Scorpio. Now, if you want to look up the chart, it actually required a little bit of research to look it up. What was on IMDb, I forget exactly what was on IMDb.com, but I remember thinking it didn't seem like it was correct, and so I went and did some research, found, I believe it was an LA Times article, and the cast and crew had been talking about how when it debuted in France at the Cannes Film Festival, how they knew they had a big deal in their hands by how people reacted. And so I went and looked that up. May 13th, 1991 in Cannes, France. So we don't have a time, but I went ahead and guessed 8 p.m. And whatever the time was, the moon was in mid-Taurus. So whether the time was a few hours early or a few hours late, it still would have been in Taurus. So it still was going to be a double Taurus, and still opposed by that Pluto and Scorpio. So a few other things that we see here. So May 13th, 1991. Mercury in Aries, square Mars in Cancer. Okay, so Mercury, communication in Aries, likes to shoot from the hip. And it's squared by Mars, and Mars is action, aggression, but also violence. So that looks like very angry, aggressive forms of communication. Now the thing is whenever you see a square, my philosophy on squares in astrology is it generally indicates that something happened where there was maybe a trine in either a previous life or early portions of this life, depending on how you believe how those things work. And that trine got slept walk through. So if this was a client, it's like you slept walk through the trine, and now the same issues show up with a square. Well, this is a movie, it's not a person. But if you think about the issues that were raised in the film, those are issues that our society really hadn't talked about publicly, at least not mainstream society. So finally it comes as a square with Mercury in Aries, square Mars, and Mars doesn't particularly like to be in Cancer either, so it's it's kind of an afflicted Mercury there, which means people think of that as a bad thing. And it's only bad in that it means there's something that absolutely positively has to be said. Now, if you go watch the film, one of the things I remember about it was the theme song. How to Survive in South Central. Okay, it's rapped by Ice Cube, and he does like a customer service thing where it starts off as welcome to South Central, and like you're going on vacation, and then it as he continues to rap, it evolves into something more intense. Really creative way of explaining how things are going on, and also very Mercury Mars. Okay, got that. We have Jupiter in Leo. So Jupiter is where you are fortunate, and when Jupiter's in Leo, the person is fortunate. They're gonna have no problem attracting attention to themselves. Okay, they like to throw big parties, big movie stars, things like that. Now the thing is, it's Jupiter in Leo, but it's Jupiter in Leo directly to the degree, possibly almost down to the second minute. Jupiter at 6 degrees 25 minutes Leo, and Saturn at 6 degrees 49 minutes Aquarius. So Jupiter in Leo wants to throw that big party, but is restrained by Saturn in Aquarius by either responsibilities or restrictions involving groups. And if I recall correctly, originally the film was supposed to be have the 5 members of NWA were supposed to be the stars, and but I guess they had broken up, or something had happened, and the only one who ended up being in the movie was Ice Cube, who of course went on to be a huge recording star and a huge movie star at the same time. So that's the Jupiter in Leo. Yeah, you're going to be a big deal, but it had to deal with some restrictions involving the group dynamics, which is Aquarius. Okay, Mars on the south node. So Mars in Cancer on the south node. So anytime you see planets on the south node, gotta think about, it's like things that were either done too much or not enough in past lives or earlier parts of this life. And then of course the north node is where you're heading long term. Well, Mars on the south node means moving away from violence. There may have been too much Mars in previous lives or earlier parts of this life. And again, it's a film, it's not a person with a previous lives or anything like that. But metaphorically, if you look at the plot of the film, that's what it's basically about, is moving away from violence in the homeland, Mars in Cancer, and it's moving towards the outside world. So of course at the end we find out Cuba Gooding Jr. character goes off to a certain college, and his girlfriend also goes off to college. So it's long term is about moving towards more being more, I guess you could say, societal success. That north node at 20 Capricorn is of course trined by all those Taurus, the Taurus sun and Taurus moon. One other thing before I forget, the Taurus and Taurus moon, it's opposite Pluto, which can be like death. And that movie, you can't watch it without crying at the end. It's pretty much impossible. So that's it. There's other things in the chart. It was during that Uranus-Neptune conjunction we had in the early 90s. And there's more, but those are the big things that jump out to me. Okay, so we're gonna do another little musical break, and we're gonna come back and we're gonna do American Made. Now, American Made and Boys in the Hood, on the one hand they have somewhat similar, they cover similar subjects in a weird way, from very different perspectives. But here's the big difference, is that Boys in the Hood was profoundly honest. Okay, so Mercury, in fact, it's so honest that it may have scared some people. Mercury Mars square, and there's I guess it's loosely square Neptune, but very, very, very wide orb, 10-degree orb. And the Neptune's retrograde, so the Mercury's moving away, and the Mercury's direct, so it's moving away from the confusion, which would be Neptune. So it's actually a profoundly honest film. But very depressing. You always want to cry at the end. American Made was actually it was accurate in a very broad sense. It got the broad brushstrokes of history correct. But it was kind of almost a little dishonest. I don't want to say totally dishonest, but it made it seem like almost upbeat and happy what was going on. Now, it was a fun film though. Like I really enjoyed it, and I sometimes go to see movies just to get my mind off everything, because I have as you might imagine, have a very active mind, and sometimes too active, and so I like to go to the movies because with that big screen in front of me, my mind basically shuts down for those few hours. And American Made, I had a lot of fun watching it. Really enjoyed it. If I went and saw it, if somebody was like, "Hey Matt, you want to go see it again?" I'd be like, "Yeah, sure." So it was fun and exciting, even though I knew the history of what they were depicting. I had read quite a bit about, and I knew they weren't being totally honest. It had a Mercury-Neptune opposition, and it wasn't totally dishonest though. So you got close. The Mercury was backing up. It was a Mercury retrograde in what was that? I think in Virgo, backing up to oppose Neptune and Pisces, but it got within 2 degrees of the Neptune and Pisces, and then it went direct a few days after the film came out. So okay, I'll take a break. We'll come back and we'll continue talking about American Made. Okay, so we're back to discuss American Made, the Tom Cruise movie about Barry Seal, who's a infamous CIA cocaine trafficker back in the 80s. I'm looking at the chart here. Is debuted, if you want to look it up, August 18th, 2017 in Taiwan. So we don't have a time, but whatever the time was, it's a Leo. Sun, Mars, North Node, all in a close conjunction there in late Leo. Moon at 7 Cancer, if we set it for noon, so the moon is going to be in Cancer no matter what. Okay, so before we get too deep into the chart, because since I was comparing it to Boys in the Hood, very honest film, but very upsetting. If you go see it on a Friday night, you watch it on Netflix, you might not be back to your normal self till Tuesday. It's very emotionally moving, but very honest. American Made is sort of honest, but in a lot of ways very dishonest. But it's a fun film. You see that on Netflix on a Friday night, you'll be A-okay to go about your normal self the rest of that night or the next morning. Okay. So we had the Sun 25 Leo, Mars 18 Leo, North Node 24 Leo. So anytime you see all that Leo, you're looking at something that's going to have a lot of entertainment value. Okay, it's going to have no trouble expressing itself because you have a Sun-Mars conjunction. So Sun is illumination, conscious identity, and it's conjunct Mars, which is action in Leo, which again is more light. And the North Node is right there at 24 Leo. So whenever you have a North Node is conjunct a planet, you're getting an enhancement of that planet. So you're getting, in this case, an enhancement of that Sun-Mars energy. Thing with Sun, Mars, and Leo, hexagon has Sun, Venus, and Mars in Leo. And then my friend Carrie DeVoli, aka Carrie the Virgo voice healer, she had just Mars and North Node in Leo right on her midheaven, which is why a few years ago I worked it out with her where she would be in the Kickstarter video and also performed at our party, because I knew with Mars, North Node, and Leo, she'd come through big in the clutch as an entertainer. Well, this movie kind of does that. If it's a Friday night and you needed to have an entertaining movie to go watch, this would actually totally fit the bill. Sun, North Node, Mars, and Leo. And it gets a supportive trine from Saturn at 21 Sagittarius. So Saturn is structure, responsibility, hard work. It's in Sagittarius, which is travels, and most of the movie involves airplanes. Okay, involves foreign travel. And I like to see Saturn trines for things that are well constructed. And as a film, as purely as an entertainment vehicle, it's very well constructed. right? Saturn kind of gets a bad rap, but I love those Saturn trines, like a Saturn Sun trine. Love to see that type of thing. Here it's right smack dab. Let's see, Sun and Mars, the midpoint would be about 21 or 22 Leo, and the Saturn is at 21 Sag. So all that entertaining Leo energy is very supported by the planet of structure and responsibility. Okay. Moon is in Cancer, as is Venus, and most of the movie basically revolves around his family, right? And I believe Barry Seal was a double Cancer. Now, what really stands out here in this chart is there's a Venus-Jupiter square and a Jupiter-Pluto square. Okay, the two aspects par excellence for overdoing things would be Venus-Jupiter, a square between Venus and Jupiter, and a square between Jupiter and Pluto. And what all of those indicate, particularly a Jupiter-Pluto square, because Jupiter is expansion, benevolence, largesse. It's in Libra, relationships, and Pluto's in Capricorn, of course, is mass mobilization of resources. And you do see that in the film. You know, lots of money and lots of, they're mobilizing the Contras, and he's got a Domhnall Gleeson, who you see in the film. He's the CIA handler, Schaefer, but that's not his real name. We never find out what his real name is in the film. He mobilizes resources. Barry Seal mobilizes resources. The cartels mobilize resources. A lot of mobilization of resources. And the thing is, when you have that Venus-Jupiter square and a Jupiter-Pluto square, you get what's called a T-square. So if you're familiar with astrology, you know what that looks like. You have 3 planets, so 3-planet configuration with 2 squares. In this case, Venus is at 20 Cancer, opposite Pluto at 17 Capricorn, and then you've got Jupiter at 19 Libra. And so the exit point for that is we have a T-square. All the energy goes out the opposite of the apex planet. In this case, that's Jupiter in Libra. So all that energy shoots out to about 20 degrees Aries. Now, my moon's at 20 degrees Aries, so all of the mobilization of resources in this film hits my moon, like spot on. So, it makes sense that I enjoyed the film so much, because my Aries moon, which loves action and adventure, and particularly 9th house matters, which is, adventure, more adventure. It really enjoyed the film. And that 20 degrees Aries point, of course, is also supported by the Leo planets and by Saturn and Sag. So, what else is going on? That's the main thing. I already discussed Mercury is retrograde in Virgo. So again, whenever you see a retrograde planet, that means there's something that a story, in case of Mercury, something had to be communicated. It probably should have been communicated earlier, didn't get communicated, and finally now it's getting communicated. And actually, this chart, you've got Mercury, Saturn, Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus all retrograde. So there's something about this film that should have come out quite a while ago, and finally now is coming out. That Mercury retrograde is backing up into Neptune at 13. Oh, wait a minute. I think I gave you guys slightly incorrect information here. It had already probably, Mercury's at 10 degrees Virgo, opposite Neptune at 13 degrees Pisces, so there is a Mercury-Neptune opposition. And right after this film was released, then it went direct. So it actually did oppose Neptune a few days after this film came out. I had it a little reversed when I was explaining it earlier. But the idea is basically the same. There's a Mercury-Neptune opposition. And so Mercury-Neptune, anytime you see Mercury-Neptune, Mercury, again, communication. It's good for like music, and it's good for things where the exact details are not going to be super important, right? That's a nice way of what I'm trying to say. It's considered also a good aspect for not being totally truthful, all right, which is also why Neptune aspects can be effective in politics, because politics is all about not being completely truthful, all right? So film is not completely truthful. So as long as you're not using it as a documentary per se, that's okay. My concern with this film is it almost treats what Barry Seal was doing as like a cocaine startup. You know, like, oh, it's just a startup, and it happened to involve cocaine. And since nowadays most people believe, or not most, but there's definitely a feeling that the drug should be either legalized or decriminalized, we're almost sympathetic to the guy. But then you got to look at the deleterious effects of what was being brought in. All that cocaine, if it hadn't been brought in, you wouldn't have had the crack epidemic. Somebody had to be bringing it in. And then I always have a thing, drugs come in, prisons go up, jobs go out, right? And that's exactly what happened in through significant portions of America. So that never gets addressed, really. You know, at the end, he just talks about how, oh, this is such a great country that somebody like me could, you know, build a cocaine empire. Okay. So, you know, I was definitely not okay with that. But like I said several times, that was a fun film. So you can go see it and enjoy it for that. Good example astrologically. The three things I would say it's a great example, or four things it's a great example of. All that Leo energy. Sun, Mars, North Node in Leo. Very entertaining, very high profile. No trouble attracting attention to itself. The Venus, Jupiter, and Jupiter-Pluto squares are a great example of overdoing things, taking things a little too far. Okay, but also mass mobilization of resources. It's a good example of that. And Saturn trine the Sun and the Mars. Good example of Saturn providing responsibility and structure to those other planets. And finally, the Mercury-Neptune opposition, which is, you know, good for entertainment, but not so great for being totally honest. So, you know, I just hope that I hope that film, you know, doesn't encourage anybody to go into that business, or, for lack of a better word, whitewashes it or whatnot. Because if you do more research, you know, the effects of all of that were very deleterious, and you know, certain institutions, organizations that did very well through the suffering that resulted from all that. One more thing before I call it a wrap. So one more thing is that Catherine Austin Fitts, who, if you don't know who she is, just go and Google her. I consider her to be a reputable person. And she had mentioned once that Barry Seal's airplane had been making stops at Area 51. Okay, now when people hear Area 51, they always think of aliens, right? And actually, as I'm recording this, the new season of X-Files is making its debut, and I've been into X-Files and aliens and been always fascinated by all that sort of stuff. But if that's the case, if it's the case that Barry Seal was making stops at Area 51, and I don't have documentation of that, but if Catherine Austin Fitts says it, I have to at least think about it. If that's the case, then that raises issues about what was being done with the money, right? You know, was it just going into Barry Seal's Panamanian bank account, or wherever it was that he kept his money, or into mattresses, or into, you know, one of the big things in the film you see is they've got so much money they don't know where to put it all. So was it just going there, or if that was the case, allegedly, making stops at Area 51, you know, where was that money being used to finance or whatnot? And again, I don't know. I don't have any documentation of that, but that's what she says. And therefore, it's something to you know, contemplate as a possibility. Okay, that is about it. So, been fun recording this. Hopefully, it is enjoyable and informative, and we'll see you guys later. All right, bye.